post-game show. I'm your host, John Serianides. As always, I'm joined by my partner, WEI's John Lyons. Patriots losing in overtime to the Tennessee Titans 20-17. John, how you doing this evening? Tough one today.
It certainly was, and it was a game that I think the Patriots played really poorly for the vast majority of this game, offensively and defensively. And then you had that one great play at the end of the game. Drake May hits Ramondre Stevenson for the tying touchdown, and it was a pretty good drive as well. But that one signature moment, and then they follow it up by letting the Titans go right down the field to kick a field goal. Then May throws a bad interception afterwards. So despite the fact that they had that one great moment, and even that good drive at the end, I to me, John, I think the Miami loss was the worst loss of the year, but this is probably second. And just because this was a Tennessee team, especially with L'Jarius Sneed out, Quandre Diggs got hurt during the game and missed most of it. This was probably the only team on the Patriots schedule that they were going to step on the field with relatively equal talent. And they weren't able to win this game. And really, look, their defense only gave up 20 points, but again, in overtime, another one of those key situations when they needed a stop. We've talked about this, I feel like 4 or 5 times so far this year. They didn't get it. And offensively, I thought Drake May, despite that one amazing moment, probably had his worst game as a Patriot. However, got no help either. The O-line was bad. The receivers are bad. I thought the coaching was bad. I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but it just feels like to me, again, the Miami loss was the worst one. This is second. This was a bad performance in all phases for the Patriots today.
Yeah, and before we really jump into things here, as always, we know you have plenty of Patriots post-game options, but give us a shot. We want to be a place where you can come on and share your thoughts and vent. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you want to see. Tell us anything you want to talk about that's Patriots related or related to today's game. Again, you can watch us live on Facebook, X, Twitch, and our YouTube channel. Just jump on the chat feature, comment. We'll put your comment on the screen, and we'll talk Patriots with you. So jump on and join the conversation. Yeah, it was a funny game. For about 3 quarters, John, it was a bad game. And you're watching it and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, well, these two teams are bad football teams. One is 2-6. The other is 1-6. Neither of them are going to make the playoffs. They've had some injuries, but by and large, both teams, generally speaking, have been pretty bad this season, with the exception of a couple of games. Then business picked up in the fourth quarter. Then Drake May makes a remarkable play there at the end to hit Ramondre Stevenson for the touchdown. Slide ties him with the extra point. But at that point, you're thinking, all right, they have the momentum here. If they can get a stop, get the ball back, the way the offense looked on that last possession, I thought to myself, well, they can go down here and score. And now all of a sudden, it's a different deal. But they don't. Instead, the defense does what they've done all year. In a key situation, when they need to get a stop, they don't get it. They allow Tennessee to go 80-plus yards down the field. Yes, Tennessee ends up fumbling the ball there in a key situation to force the field goal. Former Patriot great Nick Folk connects from 25 yards out, and you're thinking, okay, they have a shot. May makes a couple of plays, scrambles out, picks up 10 to 12 yards. Then on the very next play, throws a really bad interception into double coverage, and the game is over. And look, going into this game, yes, Tennessee was a bad football team, but on paper, they're a pretty talented football team. Remember, this offseason, they spent a lot of money in free agency. They fortified the offensive line through the draft with J.C. Latham, putting him next to Peter Skoronski to form a pretty good left side. They did everything you needed to do to turn things around in a division that's been up for grabs in recent years, the AFC South. It hasn't come together under first-year coach Brian Callahan. They are and were the better team going into this game, despite their record. And that, to me, is ultimately why they won today. They had Tony Pollard. They had Calvin Ridley. They have guys that can make plays when they need them. And their defense, which, by the way, most people probably didn't even know this, coming into the game was the number 1 ranked defense in the league. So they're the better team. And while they haven't necessarily played up to their ability, their talent proved to be the difference in the end.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this, too, was how many mistakes the Patriots made, especially offensively. I mean, those 2 May interceptions were really bad decisions and bad throws. How many we can look at the penalty numbers for what they were. I think the Patriots had, 8 penalties for 58 yards. but there were also key penalties that took away first downs. I think of the Kendrick Bourne nice catch and run for a first down late that was taken off the board because of a penalty. There was a lot of those. We saw another piece of this too, John, and I know I said May didn't play well, but it felt like he was kind of alone out there. He threw 41 times. He ran 8 times for 95 yards, which, by the way, I think is too much for him to be running. And it was all scrambles when he was under pressure. No one was open. But outside of Drake May, Ramondre Stevenson had 10 carries for 16 yards, and that's the only offense you got that didn't involve May throwing or May running. And I think that is a big problem for this offense, too. And I think, I don't know how you feel, John, but it seemed like whenever the Patriots tried something offensively, Tennessee was not fooled, and they were never off balance. And I put that on Van Pelt as much as anyone else. It just felt like, the Patriots have hit a couple nice motion plays to Demario Douglas for first downs in previous weeks. So they tried the same play earlier. Tennessee was ready for it, and the Patriots really had no adjustment off it. So it just felt like they were really predictable on offense. Then they made a bunch of mistakes on top of it. And then again, defensively, 20 points isn't bad, but it's one of those games you walk away from feeling like they could have got another stop if they or two maybe.
Yeah, Lauren Gaudette, friend of the show, joins the show. I thought the defense didn't really get as many stops as much as Tennessee would make mistakes and couldn't get themselves out of the mistakes. I don't think I read that right, but whatever. We get what she's trying to say. And well, it was a mistake-laden game. I mean, again, these are two bad football teams. Even though, as I said earlier, on paper, Tennessee should be much better. Their talent level is better than the Patriots. They have been bad this year. But the thing is, and I think going into this game, a lot of Tennessee's underlying numbers, when I was writing the preview, a lot of their underlying numbers tell a different story. They're almost snake bitten in a way. So they were a very deceiving opponent. So from that standpoint, yes, the Patriots went down there and played a competitive football game. But I think that the Patriots' warts showed up in this game, to your point, John. Their lack of a playmaker on offense, their inability to run the football. Going into this game, we talked about the importance of pass protection because you had Tavondre Sweat, Jeffrey Simmons inside. Those two guys might be the best interior in the game right now. They can collapse the pocket and get consistent pressure. You have Harold Landry and Arden Key coming off the edge. This is a team that can get pressure. And their secondary is the best secondary in the league statistically going into this week. So the Patriots had a stiff challenge ahead of them. And the lack of a playmaker showed up, in my opinion. I mean, Hunter Henry leads the way, 7 catches, 56 yards. Kendrick Bourne showed up, 4 for 41. Stevenson, 5 for 38. Those are your 3 best skilled players outside of Drake May. They chipped in. But again, the lack of a playmaker, the lack of a difference maker, a guy that can make a play in a key situation was abundantly evident today. And yeah, the offensive line did not play well today. They struggled with that Tennessee pass rush. But to your point that Drake May, it felt that he was alone at times. Yeah, I would agree. Just doesn't have a lot of help. He was either running for his life. That's why he ended up rushing for 95 yards, which, by the way, is a new Patriots team record in the last 40 years. I think Steve Grogan was the last Patriot to rush for over 75 yards in a game at the quarterback position. But again, their lack of talent at the skill positions, their inability to consistently win one-on-one in pass pro proved to be the difference. And I said this going in. If they had any chance of winning this game and they had a good shot, they had to win the line of scrimmage. They didn't do that today.
No, they definitely didn't win the line of scrimmage. It felt like on a lot of their running plays, their offensive linemen were catching contact and getting stood up, and they were not delivering any contact there, which, of course, that's a death knell in the run game. And your point about the playmaker, I think, look, we've talked about this a lot, obviously, but even Kendrick Bourne, and I like Kendrick Bourne a lot. I think he's a great locker room guy, and I think he's a good player. But even him, on back-to-back plays, he had a false start and then ran an out route short of the sticks in the first half. And that's just one example. But then you have Javon Baker can't get on the field. Jalen Polk committed 2 penalties today, and that's really all he did. Hunter Henry is a decent player. But again, I mean, right now, he's your best player in the passing game. And Demario Douglas had some good moments, too. That one-handed catch he had was probably the best play a Patriots receiver has made all year. But you don't have anybody there. I mean, the Titans were without L'Jarius Sneed, and Quandre Diggs missed most of the game, and it felt like that didn't really hurt them. I mean, with a good offense, you should be able to make them pay for that. And the Patriots just couldn't do that. And I think, again, part of it's the O-line, part of it's Van Pelt, but you're right. A huge part of it is there's no one in that passing game that a defense has to game plan for or really has to worry about. I mean, or they were like double covering Demario Douglas at times because that's all you have. I mean, that's not a guy that should ever need to get double covered. But that's, again, the state of their skill position guys.
Yeah, and I think in terms of Van Pelt, the lack of creativity in the offense really shows up in a game like this. And, it's interesting because last week after the game, a lot of the offensive players were singing his praises and they were applauding the offensive coaching staff. And that's easy to do after you win a game. It's how do you feel after you lose a game? And I'm not saying, well, after you lose a game, you should publicly come out and throw your offensive coordinator under the bus. But once again, there is a general lack of creativity there. You look at the Washington Commanders, they're 7-2. And I don't think outside of Terry McLaurin, the Patriots don't have a receiver nearly as good as him. But outside of Terry McLaurin, that's not a great skill group.
Yeah.
And I would say right now that Drake May and Jane Daniels, talent-wise, are pretty on par. In my opinion, I said this coming into the season. When you look at this draft class, and it's still early, I felt that May and Daniels had more upside than Caleb Williams. And I thought that he was a little bit more of a finished product, but he had also hit a ceiling to a degree. And I think you've seen it play out that way so far. Now, there's still plenty of football left to go, but the lack of creativity in this offense, the reason I bring up the Commanders is Cliff Kingsbury has done a tremendous job from a creative standpoint with that offense, using two halfbacks, using motion to create confusion. Okay, the Patriots don't do anything like that. They don't mix up their personnel groupings. They don't shift or motion enough. They don't do enough of those things to try to create confusion for the defense, but also put their skill players in a position where they can gain a spatial advantage and make a play. They don't do any of that. And so I think the biggest indictment on Alex Van Pelt, to me, is the lack of creativity. When and you know this, we've coached for a long time. When you know that your skill group isn't good enough, that's where you need to use smoke and mirrors. That's where motion and trading and moving guys around becomes even more valuable because you've got to find ways to get guys the ball. I don't think that's happening with this offense, and you see it once again today.
Yeah, and it's not apples to apples, but a reasonably worthy comparison. 2021, Patriots had a rookie quarterback in Mac Jones who was not as good a player as Drake May. They had a skill group that was very similar. They had Jacoby Myers, so it was a little bit better. And I think their O-line was a little bit better. Josh McDaniels had them sixth in the league in points per game. Like, now you're one of the worst offenses in the league. And again, it's not 100% apples to apples, but is your talent that much worse than it was in 2021? I don't know if it's 6 to 31st worse, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at there. And that's something, I mean, we've talked about it before. It feels like nothing in their offense really builds off itself, right? They don't run certain run schemes to set them up in play action, or they don't run short versions of passes to then build in intermediate routes to build in deeper passes. And look, some of that is, if you can't protect the quarterback, which they've struggled to do all year, there's only so much you can do in the pass game. But still, it feels like they don't have a lot of stuff that truly builds off itself to make things like I mentioned that Demario Douglas motion play, right? Well, I think a better offense would have a similar motion, but then into a different play with a similar look. And that would have thrown a defense off balance. So that's why, again, to me, it just feels like they don't have a lot that builds off itself. There's not a lot of creativity. And then on top of it, like when you're not good talent wise, that's when you're looking at 17 points they're scoring pretty much every week.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem ultimately. Offensively, long term, and we've talked about this before on this show, long term, is Alex Van Pelt the guy that's going to fully develop Drake May? Is he the guy that's going to take this offense to the next level? That to me is debatable right now.
Yeah.
And again, we don't, and we're both coaches. I hate talking about coaching job security because I am a coach. And yeah, I know I'm supposed to be a member of the media when I do this, and I'm supposed to be professional to a certain degree, but I don't like to talk about guys and their job security. And I think at the end of the day here, though, it is a fair question after a loss like today's. Is he the guy that's going to get the most out of this kid? Is he the guy that if you do add in free agency, you do add that difference maker at receiver in the draft next spring? Is this the guy? Is this the coaching staff offensively that's going to get the most out of those players? Right now, to me, the answer to that question is no, because you haven't seen it enough. You haven't. And look, again, where I do think that you give them a pass is the fact that this skill group lacks explosiveness and big playability. But all of that being said, you still, I mean, again, I keep pointing to Cliff Kingsbury. I point to Drew Petzing in Arizona.
Zach
These
Robinson in
guys,
Atlanta.
yeah, well, he's got
Guys that
more
you
to
could have
work with,
hired.
right?
Yeah.
Guys that you could have hired. But my point is, guys like Kingsbury and Petzing are working with not that much more than you have, and they're getting a lot more out of it. And I think that that's where, again, you have to judge Alex Van Pelt and the
But then
performance of
the other side, they do have to be careful of like what bad teams do and what bad organizations do is they hire new coordinators all the time or they try to
yeah,
turn things over. Like
you don't
Hunter,
want to. Yep.
yeah, like Hunter Henry's been here 4 years and he's had 4 different offensive coordinators. Like that's what bad organizations do. And it's been multiple different offenses. And do you really want I mean, we just saw, and I know it's not the same guy, but we just saw the disaster of having Mac Jones in his second year turned over to a new offense with guys that weren't the right fit. And that was more about them than it was him. But
Well, I think that it killed Mac Jones'
no,
development. He might still be your quarterback if Josh McDaniels ever left.
oh, I think he probably would be, or at least you'd be in a better place than you are right now. But either way, do you really want to subject Drake May to, unless it's a slam dunk guy out there, another, a new coordinator in his second year, another new offense to learn? Like it's a really dicey thing and I'm not even disagreeing with you that Kingsbury would have been a better hire or some of these other guys would have been a better hire. And maybe it's worthy to make a change, but it's just, again, you don't want to fall into that trap either of just constantly replacing coordinators because that's what bad organizations do.
Lauren checks back in. I feel that the kind of offense that Van Pelt runs, it requires a cerebral QB like Rodgers and Brady to make it work. The NFL is not that way anymore, like you said, John, about Kingsbury. I disagree with that. This is the predominant system in the league now. I think it comes down to which version of it are you running, though. Are you running the Shanahan-McVay version, which is why I think they hired Van Pelt? They brought him in because they wanted this modern West Coast offense. Or are you running the Mike McCarthy, Kevin Stefanski, to your point, Lauren, about Aaron Rodgers, not as much motion and window dressing. It's more about controlling the game at the line of scrimmage, canning plays and calling secondary plays or getting into other plays, not necessarily using motion, but running a formation and identifying what the defense is doing and calling the play accordingly. I think this system is more akin to that, the McCarthy-Stefanski version of the offense, than the Shanahan-McVay, where they're pretty much motioning on every play. They're trading one or two guys on every play, and they're window dressing and creating confusion for the defense. I don't know if that's what Mayo and to a degree Elliott Wolf and Kraft thought they were going to get here. I don't know if they thought they were going to get that.
And I think it's important
the
to remember.
bottom line is it's the same system. It's just they don't move as much as those other guys do.
And I think it's important to remember, like Nick Caley was their first choice. And I know he's with the Rams now, but he's a Patriot system guy under McDaniels for years. So when it comes to Van Pelt in the system, I almost think they weren't as worried about the system. Like, yeah, they like the Shanahan-McVay system and all that. But if Nick Caley was your first choice, then you weren't going for a pure Shanahan-McVay guy. You were willing to use your old system, try to blend it with some of the new stuff or the McVay stuff. Even Zach Robinson, he was a McVay guy, but he also played here with Brady, Belichick, McDaniels, and them. So he was familiar with the Patriots scheme as well. So, I mean, I think, and not to be unkind here, but I think it's clear Van Pelt wasn't their first choice. He wasn't their second choice. I don't even know if he was their third choice. Just look at all the people that they interviewed. So I wonder, was it more about, hey, this guy will come here and we think he can develop May, or was it, we want this system? Because I lean more towards, hey, this guy can develop May and he actually wants the job, as opposed to they're married to that system. Even your head coach, Gerard Mayo, I know a defensive guy, but while he was here and while he coached here, it was that Patriots offensive system on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point, and we've talked about that as well. Was he the guy? Was he not the guy? How far down the list was he? I think that, look, in my opinion, that Patriot offense, yes, when Tom Brady was a trigger man, obviously was at its best. You won 6 Super Bowls. I still think, and I've studied that system extensively. I've seen it on paper. I think that system still works, and it
I think
can
it's a
still
great
work.
offense.
It's a
Yeah.
great offense. It can still work in the NFL, and I think that's why Caley was ultimately their first choice, because they felt that he could probably, like they did on defense, where they kept a lot of continuity schematically. I think that's what they wanted on offense too. Ultimately, Caley chose not to take the job, but I do think that, to your point, you don't want to become like some of these other organizations that put their young quarterbacks at a disadvantage by constantly changing play callers. I think that in many ways that would be a mistake. If you can move on from Van Pelt, but if you don't at least give him another year and see what Drake May can do in year 2 with him, I think you're doing Drake May a disservice. You are watching the Patriots post-game show. I'm your host, John Sereninas. As always, I'm joined by my partner, WEI's John Lyons. Patriots lose in overtime to the Tennessee Titans 20-17. And John, and before I make this comment, I do want to point out again, feel free to join the show. We are coming to you live on Facebook, X, Twitch, and our YouTube page. Jump on, share your thoughts. We would love to hear from you. Let's shift gears here now and talk about the defense. I think one of the biggest problems with this defense this season, and we have touched on it at times, but I'm not sure it's being talked about enough, is the lack of pressure. They just cannot get pressure on opposing quarterbacks. Only 1 sack today. This has become a real problem for them. And look, I think a lot of people, when they traded Judon, thought, okay, you played most of last year without him. The defense actually played at a relatively high level without him. We don't need him. They'll be fine without him. And then last week, they trade Joshua Uche to the Kansas City Chiefs. And Uche was arguably your best pass rusher coming into the season. So no Judon, no Uche. I mean, who's your best pass rusher now? We thought it could be Keon White. He's been a total non-factor in terms of rushing the passer. So who would you identify on this team right now on the defensive side of the ball as this team's best pass rusher? To me, it's Anthony Jennings. I literally can't think of anybody else.
I'd say maybe Keon White, but he's kind of inconsistent.
Yeah.
And I think another piece of this, right? You don't have Christian Barmore, who's not only your best interior rusher, but one of the best. Yeah, one of the best interior rushers in the league. And it's like you mentioned, Josh Uche. He had 13 pressures this year coming into the game. So that was still the second best on the Patriots, and he's not even there, right? Keon White led the team with 31, but it's something that, I mean, right now, maybe, and I think Jennings is definitely your best edge guy in the run game. And maybe as a pass rusher, it's him and White go back and forth. But we talked about this, I felt like, after the first couple games of the season, that the only way they were getting pressure was blitzing. So even though they were getting some more pressure earlier in the year, it's because they were blitzing a lot, and that burned them in the week 3 loss to the Jets, where they went a bunch of pressure early. Rodgers picked them apart, and it feels like since then they've played a lot more coverage. And while that's helped them in that they haven't given up a bunch of big plays since then, just a couple to San Francisco, but they haven't got the pressure. And we saw that again. And we've seen too. Now, this is twice in 3 weeks. A few weeks ago, Jacksonville runs it 17 straight times and goes right down the field late in the game. Today in overtime, Tennessee ran the ball right down the field. And ultimately, they settled for a field goal, but they ran the ball right down your throat, right down the field, and you couldn't stand up to it. So this defense has a serious problem in the run game, which I think is carrying over to now. You can't create pressure in the pass game. So this front seven, something that I think before the year we looked at that might be a pretty good unit, has been largely underwhelming, and I think it's hurt them a lot.
Well, I think another problem is they're not generating turnovers. That's the other issue.
Yeah.
At all.
I mean, Tennessee was the worst turnover team in the league coming into this game.
Yeah.
And they got one turnover on a tip ball.
Defense. Yeah. And the number 1 pass defense in the league. But that's just it. You're not rushing the passer. You don't generate turnovers. And to compound things, you can't stop the run. So things are pretty bad for this team right now defensively. I mean, the fact that they only gave up 20 points today speaks to how bad Tennessee is more than anything else. And you're not going to get better in those areas. And this goes back to a point that I made to you a few weeks back, John, where I said, when you look at next year's draft, yes, the focus should be offensive tackle, wide receiver. this team has a lot of needs. And that's why, to a degree, I'm a little disappointed. And Bill Belichick talked about this during the week, but I'm a little disappointed in the Uche return. I'm not saying you're going to get a first or a second or even a third for the guy, but you can't pry a fifth out of them. You can't pry a maybe even a late fourth. Like, again, I'm not saying that they were going to get that, but the way I look at it, you probably could have gotten a little bit more for him. I mean, it's not going to do you any good if you fire sale some of these guys and get late day 3 picks for them. You need early day 3, late day 2 picks to really capitalize on next year's draft. Because again, this team has a lot of needs. It's not just going to be offensive tackle and wide receiver. You need an edge rusher. You need another corner. You need another linebacker. And they have multiple needs here. And the way I look at it is Kyle Duggar's name was mentioned in trade rumors this week. If you're going to move on from some of these guys, you got to get a better return than this. I'm not saying don't trade a guy if you don't get a high-end return per se, but you got to do a little bit better than what they got for Uche. He could be a really valuable piece for the Chiefs down the stretch here.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason the return for Uche wasn't higher is kind of on the coaching staff, and that I don't think they used him nearly enough early
No.
this year. I mean, only 2
Nope.
sacks, didn't play a ton of snaps. And look, I know he's not a good run defender, so you can't put him in all 3 downs, but it felt like there was a lot of passing situations. I don't have the exact numbers, but just a lot where he's not on the field. And that I think was a problem. So the numbers went down, the snaps were down, and then that brings the return down as well. And you bring up the trade deadline coming up, and this is something when you look at the deadline and the offseason and next year's draft, I think their goal should be to go into next year's draft with only one major need on offense. And what I mean by that is right now they have 2, right? Tackle and receiver. I think you should get one of those settled either in free agency or via trade in the offseason, and then go into the draft knowing, hey, our first round pick is going to be on whatever position they still have a need for. And then, because you're right, they need to add depth on offense behind their top needs, and they have some issues on defense here. I mean, you mentioned Kyle Duggar. I think they can't hang on to him, but I wouldn't be surprised if they trade Jonathan Jones. That's your second best corner and your
They'll
most
probably fetch you the best return of anybody that's available.
And that's not only is he your second best corner, but he's your most versatile secondary player. So now that create, even though you might get a better return for him, it creates another need on top of it. So that it's just a situation where, like, even if this defense had Christian Barmore and Jawan Bentley and Duggar was healthy and Peppers didn't have the legal situations, it would be really good. But I think we would still go into next offseason saying, hey, they need another defensive end. Hey, they need another corner. So like those needs would still be there. And it's something to watch because, I mean, now at 2-7, I think you're at a point where if you have an asset like a Jonathan Jones, and I love the guy, my favorite player on the team, or a Kendrick Bourne that can get you a decent return, I think you probably got to go for that because you're going to go into this offseason with 2 major needs on offense, but some needs on defense as well.
Yeah, and it also becomes a move money off the books type of situation as well. That always helps. They're going to have a good amount of cap space this offseason, but it wouldn't hurt to have even more at your disposal because you're going to have to overpay guys to get them to come here in free agency. This is not a good situation right now. And yes, you could sell guys on Drake May, but and this isn't a knock on Mayo, but you can't sell your head coach right now because they're probably going to be a 3, 4, 5, 6 win team at best. So you're not going to necessarily be able to sell Mayo. You're not going to necessarily, you could sell the Crafts and the success under their ownership, but guys aren't really going to care about that nearly as much as they probably should. Massachusetts is tough to play in any sport because of taxes. So this is not going to be a desirable destination this offseason. This is the reality. The only reason it was desirable previous to this is because Belichick and Brady were here and they were winning championships and guys wanted to win championships. So your best bet to rebuild this roster is via trade in the draft. And so you're going to need picks so that you have the ammunition to pull off a trade or to move up in the draft. And the best way to get those picks, to your point, John, is you trade a John Jones. I think you move on from Kendrick Bourne. He hasn't been a factor in this offense. The 4 for 41 today isn't going to help you. He's a great locker room guy. He's a family man. He's a man of faith. He would be an easy fit in a lot of locker rooms around the league. And I think that he would produce more in a better situation. You might as well, see if the 49ers want to reunite with him. There seems to be a lot of mutual respect there. Why not call Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch and say, hey, what are your thoughts on reuniting with Kendrick? You're down Ayuk. They still fancy themselves as a contender in the NFC. They might be interested. A team like the Commanders could be interested. They're a receiver short. They look like they're going to be a playoff team. Perhaps Detroit. They need another receiver. So there's going to be teams out there that will be interested in players like this. I wouldn't trade a guy out of that perceived core, but these veterans that are in the last year or two of their deals, yeah, why not?
Yeah, and there's, I think, arguments for keeping Bourne and Jones, and I put Godshaw there as well. But I think that it comes down to if the return is really good, I'd lean towards it. I don't know if you noticed this, John, but it stuck out to me. In the second half, there was a play where Kendrick Bourne was being covered along the sidelines, and May threw a near interception, and it looked like there was a miscommunication between, was it supposed to be a back shoulder throw or an over-the-top throw, and they weren't on the same page. And after the play, Bourne looked towards the sideline and kind of threw his hands up in frustration. And you saw Mayo pointing to him like, get back to the huddle. But you wonder if there's some building up frustration from a guy like Bourne to what he's just seeing in this whole operation. Because remember, this is a guy that was coached by Kyle Shanahan. He was coached by Bill Belichick. He was coached with Josh McDaniels as his OC his first year here. So he knows what a really good operation looks like. And I think he's not seeing that now. And maybe Jonathan Jones, and I'm not speaking for him, but I wouldn't be shocked if guys like him or Dietrich Wise or some others had similar frustrations that, hey, this is a rookie head coach, rookie OC, rookie DC. We, rookie QB. We're not where we need to be, and we're kind of far off. So it wouldn't surprise me if Bourne's frustrations start to bubble over, and maybe that even adds a little incentive for the team to move on and send them to a better situation.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, I think it's hard when you're a veteran in this league to be in a bad situation, to be on a bad team. And so I think for these guys, I think a guy like Jonathan Jones, who's won a Super Bowl here, I think he deserves the opportunity to go somewhere where he can chase another one. I think Kendrick Bourne deserves that opportunity. And yes, I would look to shop a Godshaw. I would look to shop even a Hunter Henry. Again, I know people are going to say, well, without him, your passing game would be really bad. I don't see them moving him, but obviously they'll definitely move somebody like an Austin Hooper. But, if a team calls, you have to listen. You are not in a position right now with this organization where you could say, geez, we want to hold on to this guy for the rest of his term, or we want to hold on to this guy for another year or two. No, you got to listen. There's certain players that are going to be off limits, obviously, but you've got to listen because it's not about this year. It never was. I know I say this every week, and I sound
no,
like
but you were right all along. You said it. Godshaw is the only one I would disagree with you there on, because I think him and Jennings are your only two good run defenders right now. And I think they're both guys that could be part of a good defense next year, the year after that. So, if someone gives you a crazy return, sure. But he's one that,
and I don't think there'll be much interest in him anyway.
No, I agree. And I think
saying.
He's a guy that is young enough that he could be a piece of what you're trying to do. Maybe like in a year or two when you're good, he could still be part of it. Whereas Bourne and John Jones, if you're good next year or the year after, I think by that point, maybe they've started to diminish a little bit. We got Bourne coming off the injury. John Jones has been in the league 8 years. So maybe those guys, it wouldn't line up. I could see it lining up with Godshaw.
Yeah. No, I agree. But it'll be interesting. Of course, the trade deadline is this week. So it'll be interesting to see.
It's on Tuesday.
It's on
Nothing
Tuesday.
else is going on that day.
Yeah. It should be a pretty quiet day on Tuesday.
Tuesday's going to be a quiet day in the media and in the world, but the trade deadline is
But the trade deadline is on Tuesday. Great job, NFL, where you have the trade deadline on Election Day. That's not stupid at all. For a league that's smart about bringing eyes to their product and getting attention, when they were trying to figure out their calendar, no one in that room said, maybe we shouldn't have it on that day.
Maybe wait a week.
It's going to be a pretty important, contentious day. Maybe we shouldn't have it. But nonetheless,
At least it's not week 6 anymore.
Yes, which is great. That was so stupid.
Yeah, that was dumb.
That it was that early. Well, you hope that between tonight and tomorrow, Elliot Wolf is working the phones and he's busy. I know there was that report last week by Josina Anderson that they were also looking to add. I wrote a piece about this. Why are you looking to add? And I know people will point to the Montez Sweat trade last year with the Bears
Yeah.
and say, well, if you can add a young guy to your core, okay. But Washington was desperate to trade him and Chase Young. They were looking to get out from those contracts, and they knew they weren't going to re-sign Sweat. So, yes, a guy like Montez Sweat was available last year, but typically that guy's not available at the trade deadline. So, while I understand if you can go out and add a young player to your core, at the same time, chances are that guy's not going to be available by Tuesday. So instead of looking at, again, you should be looking to shed some salary and you should be looking to get picks back. It's all about draft capital. I know people don't want to hear it, but in the NFL, you're only going to build a championship caliber roster again if you do it organically. You can't even build it the same way Bill Belichick did 20 plus years ago. You can't build a team like that anymore. You know, he did it organically and with a good mix of veterans. That's hard to do now.
Yeah, and I think like the only way I'm adding if I'm the Patriots is if another team does something stupid. Like if Seattle calls and says, "Hey, we want to get rid of DK Metcalf." Fine. All
Right.
right. Like I'll make that move. But otherwise, yeah, I'm not adding. Unless again, another team wants to do something stupid, then I think even the Montez Sweat thing was kind of a dumb move by Washington, right? Like that's a really good young player. They had money to spend and they still wanted to trade him. So if somebody wants to do that, fine. Otherwise, yeah, I'm looking to sell. I don't want to go crazy selling, but I'm looking to sell, especially some of the vets that, I think they should. This is something where we can see a piece of Elliott Wolf's job that maybe we don't know yet if he's good or not. And that's the self-scouting and the evaluation of his own roster. Can he figure out which guys' timelines are not going to line up between the Patriots being good and them still being good and being here? If he can figure that out, then I think they can do well on the trade deadline day. If not, though, then they won't be able to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you hope that they're busy the next couple of days and that they bring back some draft capital. And look, like I said earlier, you hope that a guy like Jonathan Jones gets the opportunity to go somewhere else and compete for a title because he deserves that. And he's been a loyal soldier. He decided to stay here a couple of years ago when he re-upped. But I think the reality is what's fair is fair. And what's fair right now is to give him an opportunity to chase a ring somewhere else. All right, final thoughts here, John, before we wrap it up. Of course, the Patriots will be back in action next Sunday when they visit the Chicago Bears. Bears are currently trailing the Arizona Cardinals right now 7-6 in the second quarter. That's a game that I think 2 weeks ago we would have said, yeah, they probably don't have a shot. But now, if Chicago loses today, they drop to 4-4. Again, to channel my inner Kevin Garnett, anything's possible.
Yeah, anything is. Look, my final thought is kind of just to follow up the trade deadline discussion we were having. I won't go as far as to say that Tuesday's a pivotal day for their rebuild because the trade deadline usually isn't, but I think it could be a helpful step, right? If you get a third round pick for somebody, or you can get a couple fourth rounders for a couple guys, and you can hit on one or two of those picks, all of a sudden that can be really valuable. So I won't go as far. It's not a pivotal day for their rebuild, but I think if they get it right, it could be a helpful step and maybe speed things up just a little bit.
Yeah. No, I agree. And again, I think it comes back to draft compensation. The more picks that they have to work with next spring, the better, because they can use those picks either in the trade market or they can use them to move around the board and add better players. Either way, this team has a lot of holes. They have a lot of needs. You've got your franchise quarterback. I think we saw that today. That last play there where he makes the throw to Stevenson after buying time, that was his defining moment as a quarterback of the Patriots so far. I also think in many ways it proved that you have the guy under center. Now it's about putting the pieces around him. So hopefully they're able to do that. But until then, we will be back with you next Sunday after the Patriots play the Chicago Bears. That will do it for this week's episode of the Patriots Pulse postgame show. Again, the Patriots lose to the Tennessee Titans 20-17 in overtime. For John Lyons, I'm John Series.